Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Assurance Unplugged podcast. It's your host, Mikaeli Desan. Today, we get to start a new series around matters internal audit. So, this current series will have a number of episodes, and the first one that we'll cover today is the major changes that have happened in terms of moving from IPPF 2017 to the current Global Internal Audit Standards, and similarly known as IPPF 2024. So on January last year, that's 9th of January, the IIA, that's the Institute of Internal Auditors, was able to release an updated version of the what we usually call the International Professional Practices Framework, the IPPF, that is currently now known as the IPPF 2024 Global Internal Audit Standards. And this was just to be able to replace what we used to have as a PPF 2017. A number of changes were proposed and recommended, and as members, we were even asked to come in and give feedback in terms of what changes would we propose or were we in agreement with, and that was successfully done. So remember, there's a lot of changes that's happening currently. There's so much that's happening in terms of, think of AI, think of emerging risks from a regulatory point of view. There's so much emphasis around that. So that necessitated the particular change that we currently have. Now, in terms of what we used to have as IPPF 2017, and those who've interacted with it, you'd remember we used to have the mission, and the mission itself would now engulf the mandatory guidance and the recommended guidance. Within the mandatory guidance, what you used to have were the core principles, then the definition of internal auditing, the code of ethics, and the standards themselves. Then within now the recommended guidance, you used to have the implementation guidance and the supplemental guidance. And to some extent within the standards, we used to have so much emphasis around now the performance standards and the attribute standards. And we'd even say the attribute standards would now go in and say, what are the characteristics or behavior that we expect of an internal auditor and the actual internal audit function. Then performance standards would speak of how do you actually conduct the actual work, so the performance of the work. Now we've moved away from that, and now what we have has been summarized into let's say simplistically 5 key domains. Yeah, so we have the global guidance itself. Then now we have something new coming in that's also called the topical requirements. We'll cover this in depth in a later episode, but simplistically put, the topical requirements simply give guidance on standardizing or how a certain particular topics should be conducted. Think of now what already has been issued, cybersecurity. Yeah, how would you conduct a cybersecurity audit? What are some of the key aspects that you need to be aware of when conducting a cybersecurity review? Talk of third-party risk management, talk of ESG, that's really an emerging area that's coming up. So a bit of guidance to the different audit teams across the globe. That's what topical requirements simply bring guidance on. We'll dissect that a bit later in a later episode. Now, the 5 domains that we have, they're really simple to remember, really easy to place. Think of it logically. So if you're talking about internal auditing, you'd first need to say, what is the purpose of internal auditing? Yeah, so that is basically the first domain. So the purpose of internal auditing, is it internal auditors are adding value? That is the purpose of internal auditing. Talk of the second domain, and we used to have the code of ethics that it wasn't necessarily being called out within the standards themselves, but now there's a bit of emphasis and there's so much being put on ethics and professionalism. A lot is going on across the globe, and there's call for us to be able to maintain certain principles as internal auditors and assurance providers. So think about, how do we come out on matters integrity? How do we demonstrate integrity in our work as internal auditors? Then how do we objectively carry out our work? So how do we maintain objectivity? Then in terms of competency, do we have the right competencies within our teams as we execute our audits? Then how are we able to exercise due professional care as we carry out our work? Then in terms of this, so much emphasis on data privacy, we handle lots and lots of data. Remember, as internal auditors, we have access to all the data within the organizations that we support. Remember, you have access to this data, but there are certain guidelines that guide how this data should be used. Think of aspects and different things that could happen if we do not handle this data that is shared with us quite correctly. So there's a need for us to also maintain confidentiality, as we handle the data we get to handle on a daily. Now, so you've defined the purpose of what we do as internal auditors. You've come and dictated the behaviors. How do we expect internal auditors to show up, on a daily as they do their work? So the third aspect would be, how do I actually go in and govern this particular internal audit function? So what gives authority to this particular internal audit function? Is it authorized by the board? And speak of the charters that are required, and even how we are positioned. Remember, we are supposed to be positioned independently as internal audit function. So just ensuring this is in place and that there's oversight by the board. Remember, we do report to the board, and oversight is provided by the board itself, and to some extent the board audit committee. Now, in terms of the domains, so we've gotten to the third domain. So first we've defined what we do, the purpose. Then we've talked about how we expect it to behave, ethics and professionalism. We've talked about what governs the work we do or the functions that we are in. So that's the third domain. Now, after we've governed, we go in and manage the internal audit function. So remember, the chief audit executive, normally usually referred to as the CAE, is expected to plan strategically. So remember, we have an internal audit plan that we must come up with. Of course, we usually have our risk-based internal audit plan, but also there's the aspect of course, we must always have in mind with agility, we must be able to review the same and keep abreast with the changes that are happening. Think of the resources that need to be managed. Talk of the human resources. So you've come up with a plan, but who will actually execute the plan? Do we have the right systems that we need? Do we have the financial resources that we need? Is the budget actually adequate? Is it approved and all that? Think of how we communicate. We should be able to communicate effectively. Then enhance quality. Remember, we expected to do our internal quality assurance reviews. There's also the expectation around the external quality assurance reviews. A major change that's come up for teams that do actually carry out external quality assurance reviews, there's an expectation for us to have a certified internal auditor within the team. So it's time for us to just make sure that's handled quite well so that we get more value in terms of the recommendations that are given to the teams. So remember, we've defined what we do, the behaviors expected. We've done the governance itself. We've done management of the team itself or the function. Now, we have a plan. How do we actually go in and perform the internal audit services? So we have an audit plan, we have particular engagement. So let's say we have the particular first engagement that's placed or expected to happen. So how do we actually plan this engagement effectively? How do we do the engagement risk assessment? And effectively be able to carry this out? How do we conduct the engagement work? So how do we actually carry out the field work? What sort of sampling will you use? What are the methodologies that will apply? All that comes in at that point. Speak of how do we communicate the engagement conclusions, How do we even do our reports? Do we consider the 5 C's, our criteria, our conditions, the cause, Then in terms of also how we do our follow-ups, think of how we monitor the action plans, Are they smart recommendations that we're giving to management? Are they linked to the root causes that relate to the actual items that we've identified? So in a nutshell, that is the 5 domains of the IPPF 2024, commonly known as the Global Internal Audit Standards. We first come in, say why we do what we do, what is the purpose of the job we do, purpose of internal auditing. 2, we go in and say, what are the ethics and professionalism requirements of the particular internal auditors in the function? Then how do we govern the internal audit function itself? Then how do we manage the internal audit function? Then the 5th one being, how do we actually perform the internal audit services? So in a nutshell, that's how we actually cover the 5 domains. So in later episodes, we'll actually go in and dissect each of the domains. Then we'll also finish up with the topical requirements just to ensure we have an end-to-end understanding of what the GIS actually require us to have. It's been an amazing episode on dissecting the global internal audit standards preview. Keep tuned for the other episodes. Subscribe, like, share. See you next time.